Have you ever had that feeling that something seemed way too perfect to be real? Like fate itself was setting a trap, dressed up as an opportunity, and you, without realizing it, were walking straight into it. That's exactly what happened to me. My name is Ethan, and everything started on a scorching afternoon in Phoenix, when I spotted a flyer taped to a leaning street lamp in the Roosevelt Row area. Assistance needed for private events, cash payment, no experience necessary. Idum. The phone number was scribbled by hand, as if they didn't want to leave much of a trace. Broke and out of options, I dialed the number. On the other end, a flat, raspy male voice answered. No small talk, no questions, just an address and a time. "Don't be late," he said in a tone that sounded more like an order than a request. That night, after second-guessing myself a dozen times, I found myself standing in front of a battered old building, tucked away between trash-littered alleys. The entrance was almost invisible, and the rusty metal gate groaned as I pushed it open. Inside, a long, dim hallway reeked of dampness, sending a shiver down my spine. At the end of the hallway, a man dressed entirely in black waited, a cap pulled low over his eyes. He didn't introduce himself. He simply handed me a clipboard to sign and a thick envelope stuffed with more cash than I'd seen in months. "Work hard, and there'll be more," he muttered, his voice carrying more of a threat than a promise. The job, he explained, was simple. Move boxes, set up structures, and most importantly, don't ask questions. What I didn't know then was that I was stepping into something far more disturbing than I could ever comprehend. That first night, as we assembled a small stage inside what looked like an abandoned warehouse, things started to feel wrong. The boxes we unloaded were oddly heavy for their size, bound with rusted chains and stamped with strange, ancient-looking symbols. No one spoke, no one smiled. We worked in a silence so heavy it seemed to press down on the air itself. If you love chilling stories, go ahead and subscribe and tap the notification bell. Trust me, what you're about to hear is much darker than you can imagine. With every task, I felt an invisible weight on my shoulders, as if unseen eyes were tracking my every move. And even though the cash was tempting, every instinct inside me screamed at me to run, but I didn't. And that was the first of many bad choices I made. At the end of my shift, the man in the cap simply gestured for me to come back the next night. Same time, same place. There were no contracts, no uniforms, no detailed instructions. Everything felt slapped together, and yet disturbingly intentional. As the days passed, it became clear that I wasn't working for any normal company. There were no offices, no meetings, no managers. It operated like a shadow network, hopping between different abandoned locations around Phoenix, deserted factories near Glendale, boarded-up houses in Tempe, forgotten storage units in Mesa. At each new spot, the materials were already waiting for us. Sealed crates, old tools, planks of wood. There was no boss in sight. Directions arrived via hastily written notes or cryptic texts from anonymous numbers. The other workers barely acknowledged each other. No real names were ever used. Instead, we had numbers: 5, 12, 17. I was 22. At first, it seemed strange. Later, I realized it was a method of keeping us detached, maybe even controlled. The first month blurred into a series of strange events. We built stages on barren lots, decorated abandoned interiors with black candles, geometric patterns drawn on dusty floors, and strategically placed antique mirrors. Officially, these were private art events. That's what they kept repeating, as if trying to convince themselves as much as us. But there were things you just couldn't overlook. Every gathering took place under almost total darkness, lit only by a handful of flickering torches. Attendees arrived wearing hooded cloaks, driving unmarked vehicles. No one spoke above a whisper. And every night after work, I would feel a deep exhaustion. Not just physical, but something that clung to my bones, draining me little by little. One evening, while helping set up some fake columns in a decrepit warehouse, I crossed paths with one of the older workers, a man with a weathered face they called 14. He barely glanced at me but hissed under his breath, "Don't ask, never ask." His voice was so brittle, so loaded with fear, that for the first time I felt a real chill crawl over my skin. The worst part was that despite everything, the envelopes kept getting thicker. The money grew alongside the strangeness of the events. It was as if they were buying us bit by bit, numbing our survival instincts with stacks of tainted bills. But the real horror hadn't even begun yet, and by then, walking away was no longer an option. As the weeks wore on, the suspicions I had buried deep started clawing their way to the surface. Details I had ignored out of fear or necessity started haunting me even when I wasn't on the job. I remember one night in particular, out at a crumbling farmhouse on the outskirts of Chandler. The building was ancient, its walls cracked and damp, as if the very air had been stagnant for centuries. That night, my task was to move several small crates, none bigger than a microwave. Yet each one was inexplicably heavy, bound tight with thick rusted chains. Even stranger, the boxes seemed to vibrate faintly in my arms, as if something inside was trying to get out. For the first time, I felt like I was carrying something alive, or something that wanted to be freed. I tried to rationalize it away. Maybe it was my exhaustion playing tricks on me. But then I saw the markings. Each box was etched with unfamiliar symbols, twisted spirals, eyes with 3 pupils, intertwined claws. When I touched them, I could swear they gave off a faint warmth, like the boxes themselves were breathing. When I discreetly asked another worker about it, he shot me a look filled with pure terror and muttered a warning. "If you want to keep getting paid, don't look, don't listen." But it was impossible not to notice. Each event seemed to thicken the very air around us. A constant hum of whispers just at the edge of hearing, like 1,000 voices murmuring secrets you were never meant to understand. One night, as I was securing a wooden frame meant to serve as some kind of altar, I froze when I heard it. A muffled sobbing coming from one of the stacked crates, a sound raw with despair. It couldn't be real. It shouldn't have been real. My heart hammered in my chest, and for a moment I was ready to drop everything and bolt. But then I thought about the envelope full of cash sitting in my backpack. I thought about the overdue rent, the mounting bills, the promises I had made to my family. I clung to the idea that there was a rational explanation, maybe hidden speakers, maybe some elaborate special effects, and forced myself to keep working. That was the lie I told myself, my tiny shield of denial. But when I got home that night, I knew something had shifted. The small garden outside my apartment was withered and blackened, as if it had been scorched from the inside out, and drawn on my front door, using what looked like ash, was an uneven circle, almost identical to the markings on the crates. There was no wind, no prankster neighbors. Something or someone had followed me home. And little did I know, this was just the opening act of a nightmare I would never be able to escape. After that night in Chandler, I started working under a constant cloud of paranoia, like something unseen had latched onto my shadow. Each new assignment grew stranger than the last, as if they were leading me deeper and deeper into a maze with no way out. One evening, they sent us to an abandoned church on the outskirts of Flagstaff. The building, swallowed by overgrown vines and years of decay, looked ready to collapse, but its shattered stained glass windows and towering bell tower still pointed accusingly toward the sky. The task seemed simple. Set up a circle of mirrors around the main altar, place black candles throughout the nave, and build a small stage out of old timber. No one explained why. No one questioned it. The moment we stepped inside, the air was thick and suffocating. A sickly, sweet stench clung to everything, like rotting meat masked with cheap cologne. The torches we lit barely pierced the oppressive gloom pooled in every corner. As I worked, something made my blood run cold. The mirrors we positioned around the altar didn't reflect our movements properly. It was as if the reflections lagged just a fraction of a second behind, flickering unnaturally, as though the glass wasn't a reflection at all, but a window into somewhere else. I tried to ignore it. I kept moving planks and arranging candles, but something compelled me to look again. And that's when I saw it. Through one of the mirrors, a tall, hooded figure stood silently behind me. I spun around instantly. Nothing. Just my co-workers, busy with their tasks, oblivious. But in the mirror, the figure remained. From that moment on, I began to hear whispers. They didn't come from my colleagues, nor from the night outside. They emerged from the darkest corners of the church, voices calling out my real name, not the number I had been assigned. Ethan, Ethan. Every time I tried to concentrate, the murmurs grew louder, until I could feel the ground beneath my feet subtly tremble, like something beneath the earth was trying to claw its way up. One of the mirrors toppled without anyone touching it, shattering into hundreds of razor-sharp shards. No one said a word. No one even seemed to notice, as if they were all trapped in some different layer of reality, one we weren't meant to disturb. That night, I realized I had crossed an invisible threshold. I was no longer just a worker. Something had seen me, and it wasn't going to let me go. And believe me, if you think this sounds terrifying, what happened next was far, far worse. Before we go any further, if you're enjoying this story and you're passionate about unsettling tales, I invite you to tap the yellow lamp icon and stay with us, so together we can uncover deeply disturbing mysteries. Trust me, you're going to want someone with you for what's coming next. After the night in the abandoned church, my mind couldn't find any rest. I started hearing the whispers even during daylight, in places where I knew I was alone. I constantly felt cold fingers brushing the back of my neck, a presence that never left my side. A couple of nights later, they sent us to prepare for an event at an old, crumbling mansion near the banks of the Salt River. The house was hidden behind a rusted fence and twisted trees that seemed to murmur to each other whenever the wind passed through. The setup was similar to the others: erect structures, stack boxes, arrange candles. But that night, the atmosphere was even heavier than usual. Every step inside the house echoed like a deep drumbeat, as if the very walls were alive and breathing. At one point, I felt an overwhelming urge to wash my hands. They were coated in ancient dust, and an awful, clinging odor seeped into my skin. I found a small bathroom at the end of a narrow, flickering hallway. The single bulb overhead sputtered weakly, casting sporadic bursts of light that made the shadows dance erratically. I turned on the faucet, and at first, thick brown water poured out, carrying centuries of decay. As I scrubbed my hands, I looked up at the cracked mirror, and I saw it. A message, scrawled in shaky, uneven strokes on the fogged glass. "They're using you. Run while you still can." Every muscle in my body tensed. The air seemed to thicken around me. I felt an invisible weight press down on my shoulders, pinning me in place. I blinked hard, trying to shake off the vision, but when I looked again, the words had vanished. All that remained was my own reflection, pale and trembling, staring back with eyes I barely recognized as my own. I stumbled out of the bathroom, my heart pounding, trying to act normal even though it felt like every brick in that house was whispering secrets meant to stay buried. I wanted to leave everything behind, to flee, to vanish. But something, maybe the same force that had drawn me into this in the first place, kept me rooted there, an impulse stronger than fear, a sick, gnawing curiosity that pushed me to continue, to uncover whatever truth I was blindly helping to build. That night, when I returned to my apartment, I found grimy handprints smeared across my front door. They weren't human. They were far too large, and they only had 4 fingers. Even though I tried to rationalize everything away, deep down, I knew it was already too late to escape. After the message on the mirror and the strange marks at my door, every day became a battle against my own terror. I thought about quitting. I even drafted a message to the anonymous number that sent us our assignments, but I never hit send. Something inside me, pride, desperation, or pure stubbornness, made me stay. A week later, I received a different kind of summons. Special event. Trusted personnel only. Do not look inside the main box. The warning made my skin crawl. but it also fed that poisonous curiosity growing inside me. The location was an abandoned warehouse in Mesa. We arrived at dusk, the sky bleeding into a deep orange. Everything was more organized than usual. Precise marks on the concrete floor, circles of salt, black candles arranged into patterns I couldn't decipher. The main box dwarfed anything we had handled before. It was enormous. Intricate carvings covered its surface, and thick iron chains wrapped tightly around it, securing whatever was inside. We were given strict orders. Don't get close, don't touch, don't even look too long. As we busied ourselves setting up the perimeter, I couldn't help sneaking glances at it. Something inside that crate was beating, faint but steady, like a diseased heart. A low hum vibrated from the box, accompanied by a putrid stench of old blood and wet earth. At one point, while draping black cloth over part of the stage, I found myself standing just inches away from it. Something, maybe the vibrations, maybe a whisper, maybe just reckless stupidity, drew me toward a tiny crack in the wood, and I looked. What I saw inside wrenched a silent scream from my throat. Thankfully, no one heard me. Inside the box, writhing in the dimness, was something I can barely describe. It resembled a human, but it was not. Its skin was a sickly gray, riddled with gaping, bloodless wounds. Its eyes, massive and hollow, locked onto mine through the crack, as if it could see into the very core of me, and its mouth, twisted into an unnatural grin, began to mutter something in a guttural tongue that didn't belong to this world. I stumbled backward, falling hard onto the concrete. No one came to help. No one even looked. It was as if they had expected this to happen. For the rest of the night, I moved like a ghost, too afraid to even lift my gaze. I knew I had crossed a boundary that could never be uncrossed. That thing knew who I was now, and deep inside, I felt the crushing certainty that I had made the worst mistake of my life. What I didn't yet realize was that peeking into that crack, glimpsing the darkness inside, had sealed my fate in a way that could never be undone. After that night at the warehouse in Mesa, I knew there was no going back. I could have run, I could have disappeared, but for some twisted reason I kept returning. Maybe it wasn't even me choosing anymore. The next summons came with a message that felt different. Prepare everything for the awakening. Do not, under any circumstance, look at the center. The tone was different now, more urgent, more final. The location was a cave outside of Sedona, near the Red Rock Wilderness. To reach it, we had to hike for hours along winding trails, guided only by old lanterns and the distant hollow beat of drums that seemed to rise from deep within the earth. When we entered the cave, a thick, almost tangible air wrapped itself around us immediately. The walls vibrated faintly, as if they were breathing, and in the center, standing atop a circle carved into black stone, was the forbidden box. Open, a hooded figure taller than any man I had ever seen stood before it, silent, motionless. He simply raised his arms toward the ceiling of the cavern, while the others, dozens of cloaked figures, began to chant a sound that froze the blood in my veins. It didn't sound like human voices. It was a deep, vibrating tone that seemed to shake the bones, stripping away pieces of sanity with each word uttered. From the open box emerged something that didn't belong to our world, a grotesque mass of shifting flesh, its limbs morphing constantly, covered in randomly placed eyes that darted around, watching, consuming everything they fell upon. Suddenly, they brought someone out. A young man, not much older than me, blindfolded and with his wrists bound. They placed him in the center of the circle. My instincts screamed at me to do something, anything, but my body refused to move. It was as if an invisible force had chained me to the ground, forcing me to witness the horror about to unfold. The creature slithered closer to the boy and with a grotesque lurch, wrapped him in its ever-shifting limbs. The chanting grew louder. The air turned suffocating. The very walls of the cave seemed to writhe in agony. And then, something happened that I will never forget. The creature absorbed the boy, as if drinking him, and for a fleeting moment, it took on his form. His face appeared in the center of that grotesque mass, screaming in a voiceless howl. That image is forever burned into my mind. I knew then that what I was witnessing wasn't merely a ritual. It was a summoning, a gateway. Something from beyond had found its way into our world, and we had been nothing but pawns. After seeing the ritual in the cave, something inside me shattered irreparably. I couldn't stay there another second. I had to get out. I had to run. I scanned the cave for the entrance, but where once there had been a simple rocky path, there was now an endless spiral. The ground trembled beneath me, and the dreadful chant still resonated in my ribs, in my skull, in my very blood. Gathering every ounce of courage I had left, I forced myself to move, shoving past anyone who blocked my path. Some of the hooded figures tried to stop me, their faces hidden, but their icy, bony hands clutching at my arms and clothes, whispering words in an unearthly tongue. I broke free, sprinting blindly through the darkness. Each step seemed to pull me further from the exit rather than closer. The corridors multiplied, and the walls seemed to close in, alive, unwilling to let me leave. Then the torches started to extinguish, one by one, plunging the tunnels into complete darkness. And from that darkness, the shapes began to emerge. Elongated shadows, with eyes glowing faintly, slithering along the floors, the ceilings, the walls, inching closer. I could hear their wet breathing. I could feel invisible fingers grazing my skin, leaving freezing trails wherever they touched. I ran until my lungs burned. I ran until my legs nearly gave out. And just when I thought I couldn't go any further, I saw it, a faint light flickering in the distance. A door, half open at the end of a narrow corridor. Without hesitation, I hurled myself toward it. But before I could reach it, a massive shadow fell over me, slamming me to the ground. I felt countless hands, cold, clawed, grabbing me, tearing at my clothes, dragging me back toward the heart of the cave. I screamed. I screamed with everything I had left inside me. And just as I thought I was lost, a figure emerged from the light. It was an old woman dressed entirely in white, a rosary dangling from her wrinkled hands. Her face was hidden beneath a translucent veil, but her presence radiated a fierce, overwhelming warmth. She lifted her hand, and the shadows recoiled with screeches, as if burned by her mere existence. She motioned for me to run to the door. Without thinking, I obeyed. As I crossed the threshold, I felt the air shift, the oppressive weight lift, but only for a moment. Because even in my escape deep down, I knew something had come through with me. Something unseen, something that would never leave me alone. After passing through that door and leaving the cave behind, I thought I had made it out, that somehow I had cheated whatever had tried to claim me. But I was wrong. I staggered back to my tiny apartment in Scottsdale, covered in dust, hands trembling, spirit broken. I locked the doors. I turned off every light. I curled up in a corner, praying that it had all been some twisted nightmare, that if I closed my eyes, it would all vanish. But there was no waking up. The nightmare was just beginning. At sunrise, I stumbled to the bathroom to splash cold water on my face, trying to piece myself back together. That's when I saw it. Dark lines had appeared across my skin. Thin, deep scars forming the same symbols I had seen carved into the sealed boxes. Inverted spirals, multiple eyes, twisted claws. It wasn't paint, it wasn't dirt. They were etched into my flesh as if they had always been there, lying dormant. When I touched them, a sharp pain stabbed through me, as if the wounds were still fresh, still pulsing beneath the surface. Terror froze me where I stood. I stumbled into the living room, searching frantically for my phone to call someone, anyone. But the screen only displayed static, distorted lines, shifting shadows that seemed to move, as if something on the other side was trying to reach out. That night, the torment escalated. As I lay in bed, trying and failing to sleep, I heard it. A soft tapping at my window, even though I lived on the third floor. A slow, patient tapping, as if whatever was outside knew it had all the time in the world. When I finally worked up the nerve to look, I saw nothing out there. Nothing. except a thin, shivering shadow pressed against the glass, like the reflection of something that no longer belonged to this world. I stumbled backward, tripping over the couch, my heart pounding violently against my ribs, the marks on my skin seared with pain. And through that burning agony, a voice whispered directly into my ear in a language I couldn't understand, but whose meaning I instinctively knew. "You opened the door. You are the channel." It dawned on me that it didn't matter how far I ran. It didn't matter if I changed my name, left the city, tried to forget. I was no longer simply Ethan. I was a marker, a living beacon that something from beyond had crossed over and had claimed as its own. And no matter how much I tried to pretend, no matter how much I clung to normalcy, the signs were everywhere. In the misted mirrors, in the distorted reflections, in the whispers that slid, uninvited, into even my deepest dreams. Something was following me. Something was waiting, and deep down, I knew the true horror hadn't even begun. It's been weeks since that night in the cave, but for me, time feels frozen, trapped in an endless spiral of paranoia and fear. I tried to rebuild my life. I changed my phone, my address, even my job. I moved to a small town near Sedona, thinking that in a quiet place, far from the chaos of Phoenix, I might find some peace. But peace was just an illusion. The first few nights were calm. I even allowed myself to believe that everything had been a figment of my fractured imagination, until the signs began. At first, they were subtle. Doors left ajar when I clearly remembered locking them. Lights flickering precisely when I was alone at home. Shadows darting across the edges of my vision, too quick to be people, too solid to be tricks of the mind. Then the dreams came. Every night, I relived the moment I peeked inside that cursed box. But in the dreams, the creature didn't stay confined. It lunged toward me, wrapped itself around me, whispering in that guttural language that I was beginning to understand on a visceral level. "Open the way, open the way." I would wake up drenched in sweat, the symbols carved into my skin burning like fresh coals, and then I knew I had never truly escaped. The door I helped open had never closed. And now I was part of something larger, older, and infinitely hungrier than my human mind could grasp. Sometimes as I walk the dusty streets of this town, I feel unseen eyes drilling into my back. I see familiar faces in the crowd, but when I get closer, their eyes are lifeless, black voids, endless pits of nothingness. They follow me, they watch me, they wait. I've stopped fighting it. What would be the point? It's like trying to run from your own shadow. Now I know that some of us are marked from the moment we accept certain opportunities, that there are jobs that aren't jobs at all. They're traps, invitations to become pawns for forces that were never meant to exist in our world. And every time I see someone putting up flyers for easy jobs, good pay, no questions asked, I feel a deep, hollow terror, because I know someone else will fall, someone else will be used, someone else will open another doorway. And the question, the one that haunts me every sleepless night, is the same one I ask you now. Would you accept the perfect job, knowing you might never come back? Or would you be wise enough to distrust anything that seems too good to be true? Think carefully about your answer, because sometimes curiosity kills far more than fear ever could.